Grinders. Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Friday, February 16th, and it's a quiet day in sports. Pretty quiet. Only one NHL game, some college basketball. How are we gonna survive a very, very, very slow sports day with the NBA All-Star break? But we got UFC 298 tomorrow. We also got NHL tomorrow, soccer. There's plenty of stuff going on tomorrow. But since UFC is coming up, we're talking to Squirrel Patrol, the master of hitting the nuts and the Squirrel Patrol's takedowns. Right, we got some premium content for MMA. Hit that like button on your way in the door. Give me those likey likes. Right, give me those subscribe buttons and give me the notification bells. John, 12 fight slate tomorrow. It's UFC 298. I think the 299 and 300 cards look amazing. People say that this card is good, but I don't know. The pay-per-view part of the card, the main card is good. And then, like, all the prelims, it feels like it's a lot like Contender Series guys. I think for most of the time we see these pay-per-view cards, it's a little bit lower variance because it's more experienced fighters that have, UFC fights under their belt. We have a whole bunch of like newcomers or aging fighters and question marks here. So outside of the main card, I actually think this could be a little higher variance than we may be accustomed to for a pay-per-view.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be a very high variance card, and I don't think people are going to play it that way. So I think it's almost like this is one of the best cards I've felt like for fantasy that I've ever seen. I was counting through the fighters, so right now, hopefully, stick it at 12 fights, 24 fighters, 5 fighters making their debut. We've got one fighter, Val Woodburn, who's 0-1 in his UFC career. Every single other fighter on the card, like the other 18 fighters, all have at least 100-point DK win in their UFC career. So yeah, couldn't ask for more. Like some very like fantasy friendly fighters. I think there's going to be some high scores, and I don't know, the fact that there's so many of the fighters have put up like high scores, and that's all in 3 rounds. I was only looking at like fights that were scheduled to go three rounds. So like some of these fighters actually, you want the fight to go as long as possible. Because they kind of outscore that 30 points per round or 25 points per round that you need, to make up the difference between like a second round and a third round win, or a first round, second round win. So I think it's going to be a really interesting card. And yeah, UFC seems to have planned a little bit better than the NHL, with no NBA games, today or tomorrow or whatever. And the All-Star game not until Sunday. Only one NHL game tonight, but that's just more time to put to our UFC lineups.
So let's start with this UFC slate with the main event, Volkanovski versus Topuria. $8,200, $8,000 fight. We normally see, trend-wise, I mean, we take a look at it from a DFS perspective, not necessarily breaking down the fights. That's what Mike and Liam do on the Ground and Pound podcast, which should be available today for premium members. They'll also be on Crunch Time tomorrow. But typically when we have these like mid-range 5-round fights, they're more likely to be optimal. And we'll also have the optimal percentages for our sims. That'll come out today as well. Only because they got 5 rounds to work with, and they're only priced at $8,200, $8,000. So a 5-round decision, it's not that hard to get 100 points in a 5-round decision. This fight is, from a betting perspective, very close, right? Volkanovski is a small favorite. The inside the distance lines aren't like amazing for a 5-round fight. I would lean Volkanovski just due to volume and I view this fight more as Volkanovski win by decision, 100+ points, or Topuria knocks him out in one of the first 3 rounds and hopefully scores 100 points. But they're also going to be, 2 of the most owned fighters on the slate. It's a 12-fight card, so it's not 15 fights. So the smaller the card, the more that we should be prioritizing the 5-round fight. I find it hard. I find it hard to build lineups that don't include one of these fighters.
Yeah, I completely agree. I disagree maybe with our ownership a little bit. I'd be surprised if Volkanovski is lower owned than Topuria, just being the current champion. And I feel like Volkanovski is probably a bigger name than Topuria. I think Topuria is going to probably win this fight. So Topuria is the fighter that I saw in Jacksonville last June for the UFC live final, and he just demolished Josh Emmett. And then Emmett turned around in December and had one of the scariest knockouts I've ever seen of Bryce Mitchell. If Emmett can do that to Bryce Mitchell and Topuria can do that to Emmett, I don't know. Topuria is a monster in there. I think it's hard to get away from this fight. I think we've got it for about 80% combined ownership. I do think Volkanovski might sneak above Topuria, but probably by not. They're going to be about equally owned, I think, which makes sense. It's a closely aligned fight. I kind of side with Topuria on a just eye test, but that's not really my area of expertise when it comes to UFC or DFS. But eye test, I think Topuria is a monster. So, and thankfully both of them are high volume. So I think this fight's going to score well. I do think there's maybe a possibility that maybe there's an early second round knockout by Topuria or something where it doesn't end where it doesn't score as well as you need to get on the winning lineup. But at 8,000, 8,200, that's tough. It's hard to see how this fight doesn't land on the winning lineup. But stuff does happen. Eye poke, something, right? Medical disqualification or no contest, always in play. A lot of times, we look at the 5-round fight and go, well, it's a heavier weight matchup. There's nothing really special here. And that's where you maybe want to fade the 5-round fight. This one, that's tough to do.
Okay, on the top of the card, though, we have a $9,600 fighter, Rinya Nakamura, facing Carlos Vera. Nakamura, not all that experienced, but Carlos Vera is a 36-year-old regional fighter that, I don't know, they just pretty much got off the street. Nakamura is a grappler. He also punches. He's also, he's a good fight. Is he going to challenge for the title? No. Not at this point, but he's a minus 1,200 favorite, minus 235 inside the distance, plus 115 in the first round. I have no interest in Carlos Vera at 6,600, but the question to me comes in, does Nakamura put up a big enough score to pay off a $9,600 price tag? With his wrestling ability, this could be the type of fight, like you mentioned before in our intro, that I may be more inclined to hope it goes to the third round than it finishes him early. If Nakamura has one takedown and ground and pound first round 108, it's quite possible that this matchup is so lopsided that I'd much rather see Vera survive and get finished in the third round and Nakamura scores 150 points.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Falls Church, Virginia has a population of about 15,000 people. One of them is apparently Carlos Vera fighting out of Falls Church. The other one of the other, 15,000 is me, Squirrel Patrol. Just sitting here in Falls Church. I keep looking out my window to see if I see Carlos Vera, walking down the street. I don't. Other than the hometown connection, I don't give Vera much chance here. For this fight, I think it's interesting. One of the things I've really been surprised about when we've come out with our optimal fighter results, our simulation results, is how frequently our simulations show the highest priced fighter being overowned. How frequently they show that the highest priced fighter, especially when there's a gap between the highest priced fighter and the next fighter on the card or the next few fighters on the card, that highest priced fighter needs to put up a huge score. And Nakamura is a good fighter. I saw the February UFC card. I guess it was his UFC debut. It was in Asia. He was the fighter on that card that really stood out. Got a very fast knockout. There's a lot of ways that he gets even a first round knockout here and doesn't land on the winning lineup. Like I said, every single fighter on this card basically has very high scores in their UFC career. So I'd rather take somebody just priced cheaper than Nakamura. It's just, there's a lot of ways here that Nakamura can get a really dominant win and still not land on the winning lineup.
Well, I want to clarify, not be on the optimal lineup, because our sims go by what's the best possible lineup, and how you decide to play these types of guys depends on the field sizes that you're playing. I want to be very clear on the large content. You can play the $25, $200K to first large field contest, or even the mini max or whatever. The more entries there are, the more likely the optimal lineup is the winning lineup, right? So in the large field contests, if our sims show that, Nakamura, is highly overowned, playing him less in the large field contest may make sense. But if you're playing the 555, if you're playing, something 500 entries or below, the winning lineup is likely not going to be the optimal lineup, only because there's only 500 lineups in the contest. So I'd be much more inclined to play Nakamura at 9,600 in a small field contest, but not in the large field contest. Remember, our sims, if you're a premium member, and you can do that by clicking on the link in the description, getting $10 off your first month. Our sims are for the large field contest. So, when it shows that the highest price fighter is, 17% chance of being optimal and going to be 40% owned, like, that's for large field. I'm assuming if you ran sims for a 500 person field contest, the ownership is a lot more efficient there.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We've got him at like 50% ownership, and that seems too much to me. And it's consistent with what other sites are predicting. I don't know. Like, he's got about an 88% chance of winning the fight, and we've got a bunch of fighters that have like a 2/3 chance of winning their fight. I don't know, like, priced almost $1,000 cheaper than him. So do I want to spend $1,000 for like a 20% increase, in the win odds? I'll probably be under the field. It's a scary fighter to be under the field on. I just think he's got to do two things to land on the winning lineup. It's important to make the distinction between the optimal lineup and the winning lineup, and the winning lineup in the large field contest versus the winning lineup in maybe a 500 person contest instead of a 100,000 person contest. But I don't know. He's got to do two things to land on the winning lineup. He's got to win his fight, which he's almost certainly going to do. But then he's also got to win it with a lot of DraftKings points, which isn't necessarily his goal. His goal might be to win the fight convincingly and in a dominant fashion, but he could even get a dominant win and not land on the winning lineup. So I'm probably going to be, I'm certainly going to be under that 50% mark. And we'll see.
Well, most of the lineups, I'm assuming that the popular constructions are going to be in the mid-range, because we have a lot of fighters in the mid-range that have good inside the distance lines. We have Anthony Hernandez, Danny Barlow, Rogério de Lima, Ming Yang, Lemos, right? Like, all of these guys. I mean, then we have the case with Merab. Merab is the outlier. Whenever my projections, my little model that I do in Excel, Merab is the only one that is the primary one that breaks my model, because his inside the distance is plus 500, but his volume and his wrestling is just so high that, like, yeah, he doesn't finish anyone. But I mean, who cares on DraftKings when he has 14 takedowns, 12 minutes of control, and 320 strikes? I'll still take that. So a lot of the scoring is in this mid-range. We have high variance fights also. So, like, to me, the high range are kind of like higher floor, lower ceiling fights. But in the mid-range, I mean, Zhang Ming Yang versus Brenson Ribeiro, they've had 40 fights between them about, and I think only 3 or 4 have ever made it to the third round.
Yeah.
Like, between the two of them. It's a light heavyweight fight. This is a fight where one guy scores 100, the other guy scores 0. And I also see if that's possible in the Marcos Rogério de Lima versus Tafa fight, that this fight may not go that long either. De Lima obviously has a little bit more wrestling in his back pocket, but it's it's heavyweight, and we've seen Justin Taffa put out people in the first round. What are your thoughts on like these? These are the two, I think, highest variance fights. And then we also, even that Fluffy Hernandez is going to be very popular at 8,800. He obviously has a ceiling. He can wrestle. He's probably going to be close to 40% owned. He's facing Roman Kopylov, who's a one-dimensional striker, but Kopylov has an inside the distance line of plus 210, and Kopylov can knock Hernandez out. Now, Kopylov, to get 100 points, he's got 5 minutes. Like Kopylov, once it gets to the second round, he's pretty much a bust. But this fight isn't. I mean, this is favored to end inside the distance in total. Also, how are you handling these? What I would consider the three. I mean, I guess Barlow Quinlan is close to fitting. Like it feels like outside of Merab versus Cejudo, which we'll talk about in a second. All of these other fights are. I wouldn't be shocked if the underdog knocked out the favorite in 90 seconds into the fight. I also wouldn't be surprised if the favorite just demolished the other guy, even in a 3-round decision in a 30-27.
Yeah. I'm probably going to try to be over the field on most of these fights in the mid-range. Yeah, they all have the potential to be very, very high scoring. I like the Hibero Zhang one because there's no game log for either of them. But like you said, yeah, like they are guys that are kill or be killed kind of mentality fighters that can put up a high score. And so they're not necessarily, they're not like the experienced fighters on this card, obviously, with no game log. But yeah, they can push, the pace. They're going to push the aggression. So that generally leads to a high DraftKings score. So that's a fight I'm definitely interested in being maybe over the field on both sides. Yeah, the Danny Barlow fight kind of fits that mold. Maybe not quite as much. But still, I think it's a fight I'm interested in being over the field on. Josh Quinlan, kind of eked out the 100-point score in his first UFC fight, or his only UFC win. So I don't know if Quinlan's really that high volume. And then the Taffa the Lima fight, I don't know. It's a heavyweight fight, but that kind of fits the mold maybe of a more traditional heavyweight fight where I don't know if it's going to be that high scoring unless there is a first round finish. So I'll probably own it at like close to their first round finish odds. But if they don't, I mean, and was Marcus Rogerio Lima does have some grappling, but I don't know. Like that's one that might not be as high scoring as some of the other fights.
Then how about this Merab Cejudo fight? Obviously, Henry Cejudo, legendary name in UFC, is 37 years old. I mean, he's not. I wouldn't say he's washed, but he's definitely not the same person he was when he was, winning it all at 125. But he is a very smart fighter, and Merab, very aggressive with takedowns and jabs. He does get close. Cejudo, Merab's gotten hurt before. I mean, the thing about this fight is that that Merab ain't stopping, right? Like cardio-wise, like Merab ain't stopping. Like he's like this guy has a battery. He could fight 13 rounds if he wanted to. The question comes in here is that obviously Cejudo has name value. So I think he may be a little bit more owned than he should be. The issue with Cejudo scoring well is that Cejudo pretty much needs a first-round knockout because he's going to be stuffing takedowns so often. You're not scoring points when you're stuffing takedowns. So even if he does stuff takedowns or get back up and, Merab only has 4 takedowns, like I don't see Cejudo necessarily scoring very well. But on the other side with Merab, I mean, Cejudo, he's smart enough that maybe Merab goes 3 rounds and only scores 92 points in a decision win, and he doesn't have as much success as he had against other fighters. But I also could put it past the point where Cejudo's 37 years old, and Merab is just way too much for him. And then Merab just smokes him.
Yeah. This is a really difficult one. I honestly don't know what I'm going to be doing with this fight yet. I think Cejudo, does have a chance to win here. And it's interesting you thought he might be overowned on name value. I was thinking Merab might be overowned on name value because he's such DraftKings gold that he's got a 99-point loss in his game log. 99 points at 8,600 might get you there. So I don't know. Like his fights are always so high paced, and that leads to such high scoring. But it was grappler versus grappler. They can negate each other. So what if it stalls out? It's got such a wide range of outcomes. Like Merab's, with 2 of his last 3 wins are over 160 DraftKings points. The other one is like 77. So pretty wide range there. I agree. I kind of want to go with Cejudo as what I thought is going to be maybe a lower owned pivot. But I know it could stall out. I don't know what to do with this fight. I'll probably own Merab just at his ownership, which I expect to be high. I think it'll be probably even higher than we've got projected. I think we've got him. What do we have his ownership projected at? About 30%. I think it's going to be higher than that. I might roster him, at the 35% level, and I expect his ownership will be higher, just because people are looking at that game log. They know his DraftKings history. So I expect him to be higher owned. I don't know. It's got a wide range of outcomes.
Well, I think it's quite possible that the fight in total is overowned compared to the range of outcomes.
Yeah,
it's quite possible that the winner of this fight just doesn't make the optimal lineup. Just like a third round Cejudo win is probably not going to get you there, even at 7,600. And Dvalishvili, maybe he has 6 takedowns. Maybe he has 7 minutes of control time. He's fighting for control and not really scoring strikes. And he'll score 90 points. I'm not upset with 90 points, and he could make the winning lineup with 90 points at 8,600, but you got guys around him like Hernandez, Barlow, Minyang, Lemos. There are knockouts here that Merab may end up being the 7th highest scoring fighter at 90 points at 8,600 and just doesn't. You don't need him.
Yeah, we've got Cejudo projected at under 10% ownership, just under 10%. I think I probably want to be over that mark. And I agree, it could stall out, and he's more likely to have a lower scoring win than Merab. Still, what he needs to do at 7,600 is a little bit less. So I think I'm going to be over that 10% mark, or that 9.9%, projected ownership. Merab is really difficult to figure out. I think he's going to be way higher owned than 30%. But I don't think he necessarily should be. It's not like he's a massive favorite here. It's just, I don't know. And he might be a fighter that I try to go higher on in smaller contests, right? Because he could have a high scoring loss that at 8,600 doesn't kill you. Like if he gets a 60-point loss, that's going to be much better than some of these killer be killed fighters, right? That I might prefer for the larger field contests, who I think might be lower owned in the larger field contests. So I agree. I think maybe I want to be over that 30% mark on Merab in smaller field contests where you don't have to be perfect. I don't know. I do think he might be overowned though, just on the name value.
So let's go up and down. Okay, we got the higher price, which are going to be contrarian options. So I'm talking about Elliott, Gary, Whitaker, and Maverick, right? We're going to be lower owned than Nakamura, lower owned than Anthony Hernandez, right? In between them, right? These fighters in the middle. Then you also have the value fighters, which may be higher owned. So we're talking about Lee, Costa, Neal, and Woodburn on the bottom. My takes here. I'm typically someone I always mention that I make my biggest scores on backing higher priced female fight, the women's MMA fights, because people don't like rostering them, especially with higher inside the distance lines. I'm breaking my rule this week. I'm much more into playing Andrea Lee on this slate at 7,300 than Miranda Maverick at 8,900. This fight is the one that's the most likely to end in a decision to go the distance. With who's around Maverick, unless Maverick bulldozes Andrea Lee, I don't see her scoring well enough. And Maverick, her wrestling success has been against garbage people like Cachoeira and like stupid. I mean, people that Shani Young and Zabina Mazo and Andrea Lee is actually her strength of schedule. She's been fighting decent fighters. That doesn't necessarily mean Andrea Lee is going to win, but I'm not convinced that Maverick has a ceiling here. And at 8,900, I'd much rather take, an Andrea Lee 70-point decision win does a lot more for me than Miranda Maverick 80-point decision win. I prefer Lee on the bottom, and at the top, Robert Whittaker, I think, against Paulo Costa. Let's see if this fight even happens, by the way. Okay, Paulo Costa has pulls out of fights, misses weight. I mean, this guy is not reliable when it comes to that. Obviously, Costa has like knockout upside, right? That's his path to victory. Just big power. But he's also past his prime. Robert Whittaker, it's not like he's the spring chicken either. But the thing that, if you've noticed in his past fights, Robert Whittaker has developed takedowns in his game that if you go 3-4 years ago, it'd be like Robert Whittaker, you typically fade in DFS because he's just kind of a stand-up striker, point fighter, has some power, but typically doesn't, necessarily finish people. But he's plus 130 inside the distance against a guy that could easily quit in the middle of a fight. And if Robert Whittaker, I mean, it's not like Costa's good on the ground. So, like, I think Robert Whittaker, if you want to call it, quote, sneaky, I think Robert Whittaker could outscore Nakamura potentially, as opposed to someone like Maverick or even someone like Ian Gary, who I never like. Ian Gary is a stand-up fighter. Unless you got 5 minutes for him to get a knockout in the first round, or he ain't scoring 100 points. And then you have Oban Elliott versus Val Woodburn. Elliott's making his debut. He did well in the Contender Series, but I mean, being a minus 310 favorite in your first UFC fight seems like that's suspect. And Val Woodburn, probably a bad fighter. He's only on the roster because he was the only one willing to fight Bo Nickel on short notice, and he got destroyed, but he fought Bo Nickel on short notice. Would I be shocked if Val Woodburn just knocked out Oban Elliott? No, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm more likely to play Whittaker on the top end and Andrea Lee, who will be owned. But taking a shot at Val Woodburn, I don't think is crazy.
Yeah, I agree on the Val Woodburn call. Actually, I think he's going to be one of my higher owned underdogs. He's just somebody I'm interested in being over the field on. We basically know nothing from the Bo Nickel fight. He lost that fight. He got KO'd in the first round, pretty early in the first round. It wasn't like a demolishing no. I mean, he got hit a couple times cleanly. But Bo Nickel is one of the best young prospects the UFC has seen. Bo Nickel, is college athlete of the year. I think he was like Big Ten athlete of the year at Penn State across all sports. And he was a wrestler. So Bo Nickel, losing that fight, to Val Woodburn losing that fight to Bo Nickel is no indictment of Val Woodburn. So we kind of know nothing about him. I'm kind of interested in being over the field. Like the line seems a little bit wide, like you said. Like, this is a debuting UFC fighter. We've seen a number of these Contender Series guys be heavily favored and lose recently, over the past year. So yeah, and it's obviously it's kind of a long shot play, but at the price, Val Woodburn could get a high scoring win, and at his very low price, that's going to probably land on the winning lineup. I agree kind of with the Whittaker Costa fight. I'm kind of surprised to see Whittaker's ownership so low. Why not Robert Whittaker? Actually, I tagged Costa as like one of the underdogs that I'm interested in. And now that I'm like seeing the projected ownership, and I do think it could shake out that way because we maybe need some value. Like I might have to reevaluate that tag. And this is a fight that we want to make sure both fighters like get on the scales and stuff and get to the octagon. I don't see like why Robert Whitaker should be like around 20% owned. Because I agree, you could get a high scoring win. Again, there's no reason why he can't outscore Nakamura. I don't mind Miranda Maverick, and I was actually surprised because you started to say, I really like playing the high priced female fighters. I don't know, like Miranda Maverick. She's got some grappling upside. She's got some high scores in her game log. I think people are going to skip over her. I think she's going to be one of the lower owned fighters. We've got her at sub 20%. And I agree. Like, why can't her takedowns are going to score just as well as the male fighters takedowns, right? So I think she might be a little bit sneaky here. Like I'm interested at rostering her over that 18 or 19% mark that we've got. I don't see why she can't outscore some of these other fighters. And in a loss, like she's probably going to put up a higher scoring loss than some of the other fighters, right? Some of the killer be killed fighters. So I don't love Andrea Lee in this spot, but I agree. And I think especially for the smaller field contests, like she's going to put up some points in a loss too. So I think in general that might be a fight that makes you very little ownership, and I don't think it necessarily should. And I agree. I actually kind of agree on the Ian Gary thing that he's a fighter in the mid upper price range that I think could get a win that's not necessarily a high scoring win. He does have the 100-point DK win in his game log, but he's not necessarily going to get a huge volume. He's not necessarily going to get takedowns, grappling points. So he's a fighter I might end up under the field on.
The same thing with Jeff Neal as compared to Andrea Lee. That if that fight is extended, like Jeff Neal could give you a 35 points in a loss, and be for small field contests maybe okay, and if he gets a decision win, maybe it's only 70 points, right? These are I consider more of the small field type of value plays. And the only fight that we haven't even talked about, right? Since I figured why not? We've already talked about literally 11 of the fights. Is in the mid range, the other female fight, Lemos versus Dern. Obviously, Lemos's path to victory is a knockout, right? Or path to 100 points, right? Is a knockout, and Dern's path to 100 points is a submission. I mean, this is fairly straightforward. Kind of either if it's on the feet, Lemos will probably, I would say, wins. Right, Mackenzie Dern on her feet is not good, but on the ground, Mackenzie Dern's probably the best female submission jiu-jitsu grappler in all of the UFC. The problem is that she can't get takedowns. So if she gets takedowns, she's probably going to score a lot of points. If she can't get takedowns, Lemos, I think, got 5 minutes for 100 points. I mean, I side in this matchup, I probably play Dern and be over the field on Dern and be under the field on Lemos. Obviously Lemos could score a knockout in the first round, but if she has to stuff takedowns from Dern, it gets into the same situation I said with Cejudo, that Lemos could win with the third round knockout and not score enough points just because she's been stuffing, takedown attempts for 2 rounds and not doing much. So I don't know what you're going to do with this fight. I think the ownership on Dern is going to be higher than 18%, though, in our ownership, because she has such a clear path that people know could score a lot of points in DFS. It's just a matter is she successful in doing so?
Yeah, I agree. And Dern's last win was over 150 points. So I agree. Right now we've got Lemos projected is slightly higher owned than Dern. I think Lemos about 22, Dern about 19. I'll probably flip that at least and go over on Dern and under on Lemos. I the listening to like UFC, prognosticators, most of them seem to like Dern in this spot. I kind of agree. And I agree. I think she's going to be higher scoring than Lemos. I think Lemos is maybe a fighter. You want to take a look at the first round implied odds and own her at that rate. And especially at like a favorite price tag. She's 8,300. That's not super high, but it's still on this card. I think you're going to need some high scores. And I don't know if she can quite get there, or like she seems like, I agree, like a fighter that might not put up enough at 8,300. Probably going to be over the field on Dern, or at least over what our projected ownership is on Dern and under our projected ownership on Lemos.
Peter Corey has a question from before. What's the difference between running sims and using an optimizer? Are projections based on sims? Well, they're two different simulations. Projections are based on like for MMA, it would be fight-based simulations. So basically simulating the fight. So simulating Volkanovski versus Topuria, and then coming out with a distribution of outcomes, and that the middle of that distribution is what the number you see, as the fantasy point, mean projection. The sim labs, which we don't have for MMA yet, but contest simulations are taking lineups that you expect to see in the contest, right? The large field contest, and then running them together. So you're running the fight simulations, but in the lineup. So you're not just running like, Volkanovski versus Topuria. It's like, well, Volkanovski versus Topuria, as well as Nakamura versus Vera, as well as all of them. And then whatever those outcomes are, what are the scores of all the lineups in the contest look like, right? And then how often does that lineup come in first place, come in second place, come in third place? So the optimal rates that you see on our, because we don't have sim labs, we still have the sim, we run sims for it, just that you have no way of customizing it. So that will come out later today. So you will see, we'll say, here's the ownership, right? Our projected ownership. And here's the percentage of time that fighter appears in the optimal lineup, right? And a lineup has 6 fighters in it. So even though Rinya Nakamura may have the highest projection, right? When we simulate the fight over and over and over and over again against Carlos Vera, his range of outcomes goes from obviously like 0, right? Gets knocked out by Vera. And then he has like 170s on one side. Like the middle is 92. But when he scores like 108, when he scores 88, when he scores 104, like he doesn't show up in the optimal lineup because the outcomes of all the other fights make it that he gets knocked out of the optimal lineup. So it's quite possible that his optimal rate may only be 18%, or maybe it's 14%. Yet someone in the mid-range like Volkanovski, like his projection is 69 in our projections, right? So based on that range of outcomes, his midpoint is 69. Now, obviously, a lot of his midpoint is 69 because he loses the fight like 45% of the time, right? It's not like Nakamura, who wins the fight like 92% of the time. So when he wins in those winning scenarios, like he's scoring 90, 100 points, and because he's 8,200, our sims may show that Volkanovski is in the optimal lineup 37% of the time, and Topuria is in it 34% of the time, purely based on price. And what does that lineup look like in this contest simulations? So an optimizer, all an optimizer is going to do is do a simple knapsack problem solve of give me whatever that fantasy point mean column is, and give me as many of those points as possible. But GPPs aren't played by mean values. They're played by, high-end values, and getting 6 of those in your lineup underneath $50,000 in salary. That's what the sim labs, that's what contest simulations help you with.
Yeah. And so, just to emphasize, especially there's heavy correlation in UFC, right? Because if in fight number 12, fighter A wins, then fighter B is probably going to lose and put up a very low score. And then when you add the salaries, that's when things start to get really interesting. And how often does this fighter win the fight? How often do they win in the first round? by a knockout? What does that do to their opponent's score? How often do they win in a third round decision? And what does that do to the opponent's score? And then you like what the simulations do is that they add all of that together, right? And they run the whole card, thousands of times and come out, okay, well, how often at this price did this fighter land in the top scoring lineup? So we don't have the sim labs for UFC. What we do have is the output of those simulations, which you can look up on a page in the MMA, premium. I'm pretty sure, it's premium content, but it says MMA DFS simulation tool, optimal lineup percentage for DraftKings. That tends to be the kind of thing I look at more often than like actually using simulations. It's just looking at the outputs. I prefer it in like table form and get an impression of who do the simulations think are over-owned versus under-owned. And I think that information is very valuable.
Yep, that's I use that as well. I use that in all sports. Slate IQ, we used to call it. Now we call it. Now it's SimLabs based, and I'm assuming at some point over the next couple of months we'll have SimLabs interface for MMA as well. But I mean, all of our we've been doing simulations here, RotoGrinders, for 4+ years. I mean, 3, 4, almost 5 years. It's just that we haven't allowed you to customize them in an interface. It's just that we've run but based on our numbers, here you go, here's the output, and not showing you the actual lineups. Because, like, just to say, it's like, Rinya Nakamura is 14, like for instance, just so you can understand this. Rinya Nakamura, let's just say he has only 14% chance to be in the optimal lineup, right? Well, when he is in the optimal lineup, what do those lineups look like, right? When Carlos Vera, like maybe Carlos Vera has an 8% chance of being in the optimal lineup. Like, but probably not in a lineup that leaves 3,000 on the table, right? So you're saying that all these the biggest underdogs all score 100+ points, like that's likelihood is not good. Most likely Carlos Vera ends up in the optimal lineup when most of the favorites win, right? And he's the only winning underdog. So like it's a 50K more type of lineup, not a 48-5 type of lineup. So just looking at the simulation outputs doesn't give you that context. SimLabs gives you that context on, these are the types of lineups for the Super Bowl. What line? Marcel Hardman, low chance of being in the optimal lineup, but what do the lineups look like that have McCall Hardman? If you want to play that line, that's what the lineup would look like, rather than some lineup that leaves 35,000 on the table where McCall Hardman, he's under-owned. But that lineup is horrible. I mean, like you could play all the under-owned fighters on an MMA card and have an awful lineup because their win condition of being the optimal lineup is just so low. Because it's like, well, they're all under-owned. It's like, but you're leaving 1,400 on the table, and you're just hoping that no one outscores any of your 6 fighters. Leaving that, it doesn't matter that all 6 of them are under-owned. It's John, what I always say, it's lineups, not players. Yeah,
I agree. Actually, it's one of the reasons I don't love like hard setting a thing to like leave a ton of salary on the table in both Showdown and UFC, even though it does get you like more like under-owned fighters and more like unique lineups, is that when Carlos Vera wins or lands on the winning lineup, it is usually going to be in a situation where you have to use close to the full salary, because that's what enables him to maybe score a little bit less, even assuming he wins, or like maybe Andrea Lee is a better example at maybe 3 times the chances of winning. She can do a little bit less in a win and still land on the winning lineup because some of the other fighters get priced off, right? Like the Nakamura gets priced off with a 101-point win. Well, he's 9,600. Whereas Andrea Lee maybe gets an 88-point win and a bunch of the 9,200, 9,100, 9,000, like all win their fights and get high scores as well. Andrea Lee's like 88, gets on the winning lineup. But like in order for that to happen, you have to be using somewhat close to the full amount of salary. It's like, I don't like leaving 1,500 on the table.
And that's what Sims would do for you. Yeah. Because they're simulating the contest. So they're showing you not only the optimal rates of the fighters, but what the lineups that predominantly look like when they are in the optimal lineup. And that's primarily what SimLabs would be used for in NBA and NFL. We have it for PGA. So PGA is probably very similar to MMA. Like, when does the $6,700 PGA golfer end up in the optimal lineup? A lot of times it's when the 12K guy is the one that won the tournament.
Yeah. Yep. And then I think like was Waste Management last weekend. Bunch of the cheap guys were in the playoff. It was like Charlie Hoffman and Nick Taylor. But yeah, Scotty Scheffler did well too. So yeah, in order to get Scotty Scheffler, you've got to be playing the $6,500 golfers.
Squirrel Patrol's takedowns. Are you having an article for UFC 298? You're working on it today?
Yeah, my day is dedicated to UFC because there is nothing else. So yeah, going to get that out probably a little bit early. Get the takedowns out. We'll have the UFC expert survey out. There'll be crunch time tomorrow for UFC. I won't be on it, but it'll be Liam, who like really knows the fight game very well. Mike Brown, very H3 Buddha, he really knows the fight game and the DFS intricacies. Very good UFC tournament player. So yeah, that'll be worth watching. And it should be a pretty good card tomorrow. I do hope weigh-ins will be probably starting in about 15 minutes here. So I do hope we stick at 12 fights. But I do think on the pay-per-view cards, we tend to have like a better chance of, it's more professional fighters. So, more professional type fighters. So they do tend to, I think, anecdotally in my head, make weight more often. So hopefully we do stick at 12 fights.
Hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door. Give me those likey likes. Give me those thummy thumbs. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. We got nothing more today, right? There's nothing else. There's no NBA. There's one NHL game. Obviously, use our projections for prop betting. I mean, I'll still be putting in some NHL props and some, maybe college basketball stuff for, not much, but there is still stuff going on. Remember, it's the NBA All-Star break. I won't be here Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, right? Because we got no NBA. There'll be some NHL, but take a break during the All-Star break. You got the slam dunk competition. You got the three-point shootout. You got the All-Star game, which features absolutely and unequivocally no defense whatsoever. So you could just enjoy yourself out there. And I'll be back. I'll be back on Thursday. So remember what I always say to people when I'm going to be gone for a day or two or three. I'm not dead. I didn't get fired. Right? Like you have to, there's no show. Oh, that means they got rid of him. They're downside. RotoGrinders is downside. Oh, he's dead. He's in the hospital. What happened? Like it's like we're gonna be off. We're gonna be off. There's not much going on.
Awesome.
What am I gonna do? Right? Like people may not see you for a week or two, but you're never like hosting a show on a regular basis. So it's like, okay, he just happens to not be on the show. Me, I miss one show and I get 14 DMs asking him if I'm dead.
Yeah. Well, I think hopefully people understand the All-Star break. It is, it's one of the, smallest or like, least amount of sports going on is, tends to be NBA All-Star break and MLB All-Star break. But there is, I think there is some exciting stuff like this weekend. There is, UFC, it's a good UFC card. And like they priced it, they made the prize pools bigger. Like DraftKings actually did the smart thing, made things a little bit bigger. NHL didn't catch on. But you still got some showdown golf. I believe there is a big NASCAR race, Daytona, this weekend.
There's also English Premier League soccer tomorrow morning.
Yeah, exactly. So there is still stuff on the calendar, and like some of these like niche sports, like there tends to be a bigger edge. So so it is. I don't know. I think it's going to be a good weekend.
So join me early in the morning for some soccer contests. I'm in the soccer Discord, so you could always mention me there. RotoGrinders.com/Discord. I'll see you back next week talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props and pick'em on RotoGrinders Today.